All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to present the chapter 3 of Brown's book. Um, the title is Age and Acquisition. So let's get started. Okay, this is the overview of what I'm going to present about. So first I'm going to present about age, the correlation between accent and also age, and then the cognitive considerations that relates to age, the development of age, and then the affective considerations too, and then some linguistic consideration, and then some age and acquisition inspired language teaching methods in which there are techniques that relate to age and acquisition. Okay, so first of all, accent and age. Accent is correlated with age due to the human needs to develop their articulator to be able to pronounce certain sounds in English. We know that language has many sounds. For example, in English, there are 20 more vowels, and then the total sounds of English is around 40 sounds. So human cannot able to to produce all the sounds in English at the first place, especially if the human is still a children. For example, the sound of th, the first sound, the children cannot produce it. The children that didn't have teeth yet, they cannot produce the sound. The same is true in example the R sound. Um, Children at the very young age cannot produce those sounds too. And then throughout their development, the more their articulators develop, the more teeth they have, they will be able to learn to pronounce all the sounds in second language, especially English. Okay, next slide. Okay, and then cognitive considerations. Cognitive relates to the acquisition of second language, as the more cognitive develops, the easier the language acquisition would be. Human cognition develops rapidly throughout the first 16 years of life and less rapidly thereafter. Some cognitive changes are critical, others are more gradual and difficult to detect. Jean Piaget outlined the course of intellectual development in a child through stages. Okay, the first stage is sensory motor stage. It's from birth to 2 is when the baby start to develop his or her sensory motor. They start to get the hang of their hands and their legs and their body. And then the second stage is pre-operational stage is between ages 2 to 7. It's in which the sensory motor of the children of the child is starting to develop. And then operational stage it's between ages 7 to 16, in which it was divided into two. The first is concrete operational stage between ages 7 to 11, meaning that the children are now able to do a complex task, but uh, they aren't able yet to think something abstract in concepts. For example, the concepts of feeling and etc. So then they need an image, they need an illustration to be able to imagine all the things related to language. And then the next one is formal operational stage. It's between ages 11 to 16. In this age, children are starting to be able to think something abstract. So when you are explaining about the concept, for example, the concept of the the feeling of love, the feeling of sad, for example, the children are now able to start to comprehend what's the meaning of those abstract things are in. And then now the consideration of the for the cognitive aspect in the learning process for second language acquisition is between rote and meaningful learning. So rote learning is learning through memorization. The teacher would, for example, give a list of vocabularies to the students, and then they are told to memorize the vocabulary, and then it could be done with the structures or the grammar too. The benefit of rote learning is for the young learners, especially those learners between the ages of 7 to 11. Why? Because they're unable to think, they're undeveloped, their comprehension, their cognitive is not fully developed yet. So it is will be beneficial for them to learn rote learning first, to memorize a lot of things because they cannot think abstractly yet. And then for the students, I'm sorry, for the student that has already developed, um, now meaningful learning would be the go-to because the students that fully develop needs learning that would be very beneficial for them that they could apply in real life scenarios rather than just memorization. And then effective considerations. So the term effective in the context of teaching and learning refers to the emotional and social aspects of learning. Affective aspects are really important as human beings are emotional creatures that are influenced by their emotions. And the affective domain includes many factors, for example, empathy, self-esteem, and extroversion, inhibition, imitation, anxiety, and then attitudes. Now, affective is it's relate with age because the more human develop with the more age development, the more effective aspect would be improved too. For example, the aspect of empathy. Students at the very young age might not have high empathy, but then as they grow older, they would they would have more empathy. The same goes on with self-esteem. So students might at start they have a low self-esteem, but then the more they grow up, the more experience they get, they start to become much more confident in themselves and thus having a higher self-esteem. And then these affective aspects is really affecting the learning of second language, especially English, because affective because humans are emotional creatures. Okay, and then the example of extroversion, the same as self-esteem also. Student might be quite shy at first, but then the more experience they get, the more they will be much more confident. And then inhibition is referring to the ability of someone to regulate themselves. So it's kind of like self-regulation. So when student is just a little child, for example, they might not have the best self-inhibition, but then the more they grow up, the more they would be good at it. And then imitation, same case. A student might not imitate the good learning process immediately, but then the more they develop, the more they would be imitate better. And then anxiety. Student might have anxiety at first, but then the more experience they got, the less anxiety they got too. Then attitudes is really correlated with age, as attitudes of the student might change the more they grow up. So then these affective aspects is really correlated with the development of age and must be the consideration of a teacher when teaching the students. And then the linguistic consideration. The first one is bilingualism. So when it comes to the second language acquisition, children that learn two languages simultaneously acquire them by the use of similar strategies. They are, in a sense, learning two first languages. And the key to success in the second language acquisition is in distinguishing separate contexts for the two languages. So in short, the the student that is learning two language at the same time is different compared to the student that only learn one language. So the consideration for the teacher is that in tailoring the learning process to suit both the bilingual students and also the monolingual students. And then the interference between first and second languages. So the first language could influence the comprehension or production of the second language. This phenomenon of interference commonly happens when with children in which their first or native language influences their English acquisition that could lead to them making mistakes because of it. This is certainly true, especially among young learners who just learn English because they are really tied to their native language and be might not hard for them to learn the new things with the new language. But then as the age develop, they would start to comprehend the new language, the second language. They would start to grasp the grammatical structures and also the pronunciation too. And then the order of acquisition. So children order of acquisition could be predicted throughout the increase of their age, as seen from the example of the acquisition order of 11 English morphemes in children learning English as second language. The first is present progress, and then and then in, on, plural, past irregular, possessives, unconjunctival copula or to be, and then articles, past regular, third person regular, and also third person irregular. And then lastly is the age and acquisition inspired language teaching methods. So the first one is total physical response. So total physical response is the teacher would demonstrate when uh, they are teaching some new vocabulary to the students. For example, if the teacher uh, taught the vocabulary to stand or to stand or to sit, the teacher rather would demonstrate the action to the students. Now, this is beneficial for young learner students as they would remember the word much more longer because it will be planted in their memory. And then the second method is the natural approach. So the idea of natural approach is teaching the second language, in this case is English, in a natural settings. The natural setting is communicative in a sense that students are not only listening and repeating the teacher, but they would also communicate. Now there are many methods that comes within the natural approach. For example, the direct method. Now the direct method is when the teacher using full of the target language, for example, English, in explaining the material to the student so that they would be exposed to English and then they would start to develop their English better. But the natural approach is after the student has already developed their cognitive. So that's why at the first time, the teacher might implement the total physical response first when the students are still young learners, and then as the more they develop, the teacher could then uh, transmit to the natural approach in which the student would be exposed to English. And then the conclusions. Age and acquisition are related, in which there are aspects that affect language acquisition that are related with the development of age. Examples being accent, cognitive, affective, and linguistic, in which all of these aspects must be considered for the educator or the teacher when teaching their students. So I think that's all from me. If you have question, just raise your hands or unmute yourself.
Hi, may I ask?
Yes, you could.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. You said that on the fifth slide, it is better to teach the children into bilingual on the concrete operational stage, if I'm not mistaken, between 7 to 11, right? So, um, uh, I thought that 7 to 11 are elementary school, right? So, my question is like, how if we as educator stick with this statement, like we teach English to this kind of children 7 to 11 ages, so they are being fluent, and in the end of the day, like most of Indonesian children are talking mixing with between English and Bahasa Indonesia. In your opinion, is it a good thing to be done, correlated to our nationalism? That's all my question. Hope you get it. Do you get my question actually?
Well, kind of get it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So basically, you were asking if we, as the educator, would implement bilingual teaching and learning process to students with ages starting from 7 to 11, right? And
Yes,
then related to nationalism too, would it be a good idea? Am I right?
exactly.
Okay. I think when you teach the students, the young learners between ages of 7 to 11 with bilingual, it would be there are basically some preparation that needed. Um, in my presentation, as I said that the concrete operational stage between ages of 7 to 11 is that the students are able now to think cognitively, but they aren't able yet to think abstracting. For example, if you explaining the concept of something that could not be sense with the five sense, it would be harder for them to understand. So I think with the limitation of the children between ages of 7 to 11, because of their cognitive hasn't developed much yet, I think it would be hard for us as the educator to implement the bilingual, but I think it still could be done. And then related to nationalism, I think even if you are teaching English, I think it does not affect the nationalism of the students because the students themselves. starting from when they just learn how to talk, they usually expose themselves with Bahasa Indonesia. So I think the implementation of bilingual in the teaching and learning process would not affect their acquisition of Bahasa Indonesia and would not affect their feeling of nationalism, their love to Indonesia too. I think it's much more depends on the societal view on this. I think because some of the conservative society maybe wouldn't agree with the idea to implement bilingual teaching and learning process to young learners of students in Indonesia. But for me, it's not a bad thing to implement bilingual teaching and learning process. So I hope that's answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. That's more than clear. Thank you. I'm sorry if it is quite out of the topic. Thank you.
Should I do the presentation now?
Yes, you might.
All right, my name is Antonius Gunawan. I'm from the class of Instructional Design and Strategy of English Teaching A3, and I'll be presenting Brown's book of chapter 5, titled Styles and Strategies. You may, next slide. All right, thank you. For the first step is learning styles. Now, learning styles are cognitive, affective, and psychological traits that are indicators of how learners perceive, interact, and respond to the learning environment. Now, in relevance of learning styles in second language acquisition, especially, there are many factors that contribute to it, such as field independence, the ability to perceive a relevant item in a field of filters or distraction, left and right brain dominance. Now, the left brain is commonly linked with traits like logical thinking, proficiency, preference for structured environments, and reliance on established information or facts. Now, right brain is commonly linked to your imagination, creativity, and visual thinking. Ambiguity tolerance is the ability to be open-minded. Reflectivity and impulsivity is when like reflectivity first, if a learner learns onto assumptions or deals things with their intuition, they are called impulsivity. If I'm sorry, if a learner waits and systematically analyzes the problem, they are reflective learners. Sorry. Now, the most common learning styles is known as visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. Visual learners tend to prefer reading, studying graphs and charts. Auditory learners tend to listen to lectures and audio. Kinesthetic learners tend to demonstrate physicality while learning. Next slide. Sorry. All right, for the strategies. Strategy, first off, is determining on how to act based out of planning. There are two types. One is learning strategies, and the other is communication strategies. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next. All right. For learning strategies, there are four, like metacognitive, cognitive, and socio-affective. Metacognitive are strategies. I'm sorry, metacognitive strategies are strategies that involve planning for learning, monitoring the learning process, and evaluating the learning. Most examples like advanced organizers, directed attention, selective attention, self-management, functional planning, self-monitoring, delayed production, and self-evaluation. Next slide. Cognitive strategies can be like repetition, resourcing, translation, grouping, note-taking, deduction, recombination, imagery, auditory representation, keyword, contextualization, elaboration, transfer, and inferencing. Now, cognitive strategies are like strategies that are limited to specific learning tasks and involve more direct manipulation of the learning material. Next slide. Now, social affective strategies involves more social approach in learning, and examples of strategies that in relevance in socio-affective is like cooperation and question for clarification. Next slide. Communication strategies. Next slide, please. Now, first up is the avoidance strategies. Is the example strategies of avoidance is like message abandonment, leaving a message unfinished because of language difficulties, and topic avoidance, avoiding topic areas or concepts that pose language difficulties. Next slide. Compensatory strategies. Now, there are many strategies to this category, like circumlocution, like describing or exemplifying the target object of action, approximation, using an alternative term which expresses the meaning of the target lexical item, use of all-purpose words, extending a general empty lexical item to context, word coinage, creating a non-existing word based on a supposed rule, fabricated patterns, using memorized stock phrases, usually for survival purposes. Non-linguistic signals like someone doing gesture, facial expression, and sound imitation, literal translation, phoneizing, code switching like using an L1 word with an L1 pronunciation, appeal for help, and starting or for time gaining strategies. Next slide. Now, there are many techniques to build strategies. Like first off, to lower inhibitions, like play guessing games and communication games. To encourage risk-taking, like praising students for making sincere efforts. To build students' confidence, like tell the students explicitly that you do believe in them, that they are capable of achieving something. Now, to help students develop intrinsic motivation, and to also promote cooperation between peers and with the teacher, to encourage students the usage of right brain processing, to promote ambiguity tolerance. It's like to encourage students to ask you, like to ask you questions if they don't have any comprehension on something. Help students to use their intuition, get students to have the mistakes work for them. Now, for this, it's like to have the students record themselves and get them identify the errors and let them catch the errors and let them fix them. To get students set their own goals, it's like explicitly encourage students to direct them to make their own objective learning. That's all. Now, next slide. That's my presentation. Any questions? Let's say that I will give like for 46. If there's no question, we can end the presentation.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Perkenalkan, nama saya Rizky Adina Friandini. Hari ini saya akan mempresentasikan human learning materi instruction media in English learning yang berjudul human learning. Next slide, please. And here's my content that I will present. First one is Ausubel's subsumption and Roger humanistic psychology and types of learning, transfer, interference, and overgeneralization. And inductive, deductive reasoning, language aptitude, intelligence and language learning, and last but not least, learning theories in action. Next slide, please. First, Ausubel subsumption theory. There are two. First one is rote learning versus meaningful learning. On the one hand is rote learning. which is about memorizing information through repetition. This can be mentally exhausting and lead to a shallow understanding of the material. On the other hand, is meaningful learning, which involves engaging with the material in a way that makes it relevant to the learner's interests and experiences. Meaningful learning encourages critical thinking, problem solving, and deeper understanding of the material. Next. Second is systematic learning. Systematical learning is a process of learning that involves using specific strategies and techniques to effectively organize and present information. This can help learners to develop a deep understanding of a subject, retain knowledge over time, and build upon existing knowledge to pursue more advanced learning goals. Next. And here's Roger Humanistic Psychology. Roger in Humanistic Psychology is a theory and practice of psychology that focuses on the individual internal experiences, perspectives, and needs. It's emphasized the significance of its person's unique experiences and how they interact with the world, in contrast to more scientific or empirical approaches to psychology. Next. And here's types of learning. There are 7 things. First, signal learning, stimulus response learning, training, verbal association, multiple discrimination, concept learning, principle learning, and problem solving. Next. And here we have transfer, interference, and overgeneralization. First is transfer. When we learn something new, we can apply that knowledge to new situations and context. This allows us to generalize and solve problems effectively. And second is interference. When we learn something new, it can interference with the information we already know. This can happen when the new information is similar to what we already know, or when it's presented in a similar context or situation. And overgeneralization. When we learn something new, we sometimes apply the knowledge to all similar situations, even when it may not be applicable. This can lead to errors in judgment and problem solving. Next, inductive and deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning is a way of thinking that starts with specific examples and generalizes to a broader rule or pattern. Deductive reasoning is a way of thinking that starts with a general rule or pattern and applies it to specific examples. Both inductive and deductive reasoning are important in English learning, and teachers can use them to help students develop their critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Next. And here we have language aptitude. Language aptitude is the ability to learn and use a language effectively. It is an important aspect of language learning and can affect a person's ability to understand and communicate in the new language. In instructional design and the strategy of English learning, language aptitude refers to the ability of of students to acquire, process, and use information effectively. Teachers can assess students' language aptitude to provide targeted support and help them improve their language skills. By catering to students' language aptitude, teachers can help them learn the language more effectively. And next, we have intelligence and language learning. Intelligence refers to a person's ability to think and learn, which can affect their ability to learn a new language. In the context of language learning, intelligence can influence a person's ability to acquire, process, and use language. Teachers can assess students' intelligence to understand their strengths and weaknesses and provide targeted support to help them improve their language skills. By focusing on student intelligence and providing them with suitable learning strategies, teachers can help them develop their language skills more effectively. Next, we have learning theories in action. The first one is the audiolingual method. The audiolingual method is a language learning approach that focuses on teaching listening and speaking skills. Teachers teach the sound of the language rather than the written form and emphasize repetition to help students develop their listening and speaking skills. This helps students learn by hearing and repeating phrases or words rather than reading or writing. Next, we have community language learning. Community language learning focuses on learning through social interaction with native speakers of the target language. This allows students to immerse themselves in the language and practice in real-world scenarios. Through these methods, students can improve their language skills through natural conversation and daily activities, which can help them develop confidence and fluency in a language. Next. That is all from my presentation. If you have any question, you can type it on the chat box. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Khairin Nur Shabina, and today I will present chapter 6 of Brown's book about personality factors in language learning. Next slide. So this is the list of contents of today's topic. Next slide. First one, self-esteem. Self-esteem encompasses how individuals view themselves, including their sense of competence, importance, success, and worth. In language learning, self-esteem is crucial as it influences students' confidence in their language abilities. Teachers can boost students' self-esteem by providing positive feedback, constructive guidance, and creating a supportive classroom atmosphere. Attribution theory and self-efficacy. Attribution theory explores how individuals attribute their successes and failures, while self-efficacy refers to individuals' beliefs in their capacity to achieve goals. Both attribution theory and self-efficacy play significant roles in language learning outcomes. Educators can support students by encouraging a growth mindset, attributing success to effort and persistence, and sharing inspiring stories of language learners who overcame challenges through determination. Next slide. Willingness to communicate. Willingness to communicate, or WTC, refers to individuals' readiness to engage in communication. Factors like motivation, personality traits, and cultural backgrounds influence WTC. Understanding students' WTC levels can guide educators in designing language activities that encourage participation and interaction. creating an inclusive environment where students feel comfortable expressing themselves and taking language risks is essential for fostering WTC. Teachers can promote WTC by incorporating communicative tasks, collaborative projects, and opportunities for meaningful interactions in the classroom. Next slide. Inhibition. Inhibition involves psychological defenses individuals use to protect their self-esteem and avoid threats. In language learning, inhibition can manifest as reluctance to speak or take risks due to fear of mistakes or negative feedback. Overcoming inhibition requires a safe learning environment where students feel empowered to take risks and make errors without fear of judgment. Teachers can support students by providing encouragement, feedback, and opportunities for self-expression to help them overcome inhibitions and engage more actively in language learning. Next slide. Risk-taking. Risk-taking is essential in language learning, involving trying new language elements and accepting the possibility of errors. While excessive risk-taking can lead to setbacks, it is crucial for language development. Teachers can help students balance risk-taking by creating a supportive environment where students feel encouraged to take linguistic risks while providing guidance and feedback to navigate challenges and learn from mistakes. Next slide. Anxiety. Anxiety, a feeling of tension and worry, can impact language learning. Moderate anxiety can enhance motivation, but excessive anxiety can hinder progress. Educators can help students manage language anxiety by incorporating stress reduction techniques, mindfulness practices, and creating a supportive learning community where students feel understood and valued. Next slide. Empathy. Empathy, understanding, and sharing others' feelings is vital for effective communication and relationships. In language learning, empathy enables students to connect with others, understand cultural nuances, and engage in intercultural interactions with sensitivity. Teachers can promote empathy by incorporating activities that encourage perspective taking, cultural awareness, and cross-cultural communication skills. Next slide. Extroversion. Extroversion and introversion influence individuals' social preferences and communication styles. Teachers should recognize and accommodate diverse communication styles in language classrooms to create inclusive learning environments where all students feel valued and respected, regardless of their personality traits. This fosters collaboration, empathy, and mutual understanding among students with varying personalities. Next slide. In conclusion, teachers should understand and deal with different traits in language learning to make everyone feel included. They can boost students' confidence, motivation, and skills by helping them feel good about themselves, being open to learning, and encouraging them to talk. Next slide. So that's all my presentation. If you have any questions, you can type it in the chat box. Thank you.